Hey everybody, it's T with the UFOs Want to Tell You Something. This week we talked to Kathleen Marden, the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. We go over abductions. I give you a refresher on Betty and Barney Hill, being my first two weren't all that well. I didn't exactly put it in the best terms. Kathleen is well known for her abduction research and understands and feels for each abductee. She's a very prolific author who has just put out a new book. Kathleen is also an experiencer. She brings validation to the phenomena. And she points out that, in fact, this is all people need. If you know an experiencer, or are an experiencer yourself, or alien abductee, please reach out to somebody like me, Preston Dennett, Debbie Cobble, or many others. We are here to help and here to listen. If you'd like to reach out to me, just send me an email at theufos@yahoo.com or hit me up on Facebook at the UFOs Want to Tell You Something. One of the big ones, my very first episodes, that's why I started my podcast this year, was Betty and Barney Hill. And I put the regression tape out there to make it more accessible for everybody to actually listen to. Could you give me a little perspective on Betty and Barney Hill being their niece? And I want to make it a little more clear for my listeners, because I really didn't do a very good job.
Okay, and just feel free to break in at any time if you have questions.
Okay.
And if you don't, then I'll probably just keep talking. I will pause occasionally, though, if you want to just fit something in. But it was September 20th, 1961, when I arrived home from school in the afternoon, a 13-year-old seventh grade student. My mother was standing at the ironing board, holding on to the telephone, and I soon learned that she was talking to my aunt, Betty Hill. And Betty and Barney had gone on a short vacation to Niagara Falls and up through Toronto and over through Montreal and then back home into New Hampshire and down to the seacoast over a few days' time. But on the way home from this trip, they encountered what we now call a flying, we then called a flying saucer, because we call them UAPs today. UFOs is apparently becoming passé. And so as I was listening, I became very curious. Well, what's going on here? Betty was concerned about contamination. My mother had agreed to call a neighbor of ours who is a physicist in order to ask for his opinion. And so then my mother called Betty back and told her that if she had a compass, she should take it out to the car to see how the needle reacts. And so this physicist apparently knew something about UFOs or UAVs that we didn't know in that time frame, at least my family. Betty did take the compass out and she held it over what she found to be new shiny spots on the trunk of the car that hadn't been there before, even the day before. And when she held the compass above those spots, the needle whirled. But when she pulled the compass away a few inches, the needle dropped down. So that indicated a magnetic field around those shiny spots. They were all of the same size, about the size of a $50 silver dollar, about that size, if you know what they look like anymore. We don't see them very often. I have some in my collection, I guess, for my children at some time. So anyway, I became very, very interested in what happened because I had never heard of this before in my life. But my mother told me that same day that back in 1958, she had been out on a grocery shopping trip with another aunt, and they had seen a large cigar-shaped craft hovering over a field on her regular Friday night grocery shopping trip. They stopped the car and they went to a home, and the people who lived in the home, who they knew, went out and they all observed this very strange craft with smaller craft flying around it. So I guess it was not the first experience that my family had. But Betty believed that they could possibly be real prior to this. Barney was a complete skeptic. He did not believe this was possible, and he was willing to state that no matter what. So what happened on that night, and I should add that within 2 days, my family and I went down to Betty's and Barney's house. They lived about 20 miles away from my childhood home. And so what happened that night is they were driving through upstate New Hampshire, and at about 11 o'clock at night, they saw a new light in the sky. It was a bright light night. The moon was 3/4 full, and Betty was trying to identify what this light was. And Barney was just driving along. He decided that he was going to go home that night. If he grew tired, he'd stop, but he wasn't tired. He was going to drive home. And so as Betty was watching over the next few miles, several miles, the craft came in closer and closer and closer, and they finally stopped and they took a look at it at Twin Mountain. And then they got back into the car, and as they entered Franconia Notch, which is a beautiful tourist section of New Hampshire, it's natural. There's a ski area there, but it's where the mountains narrow in and slope up at a very steep angle, and it's very picturesque. And so the old man of the mountain, which was New Hampshire's state symbol until it fell off the mountain in 2003, was still there in 1961. And Betty and Barney got out of the car because this craft was next to the old man's profile, which was 48 feet from forehead to chin. And the craft was rotating and appeared to be at least 1 to 1.5 times the length of the profile. The craft started moving. They could tell that it was rotating. They could tell that it was bouncing back and forth in the sky. Barney said like a yo-yo on a string. And it reminds me of what the naval officers described as bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball. I think they were describing the same action. So back in the car, they're driving south. They exited Franconia Notch, went into Lincoln, New Hampshire, where the motels and cabins started in that time frame. There were a few tourist attractions. This was the off season. There wasn't much going on there at all. And the craft was coming in closer and closer. And Betty said to Barney, "Stop the car whenever you can. I want to get another look at this. It's really closing in on us." And so before he could stop the car, the craft came swooping in and stopped about 200 feet above the highway, and then dropped to about 100 feet over the highway. And Barney had to actually pull the car into the middle of the road, straddling the yellow line in the center. He opened the door, got out with his binoculars, and he looked up at the craft as Betty was looking through the window of the car. They saw a silent, hovering, disc-shaped craft with a row of windows on the forward edge. And they could see a blue-white light emanating from those windows. Barney stepped away from the car. It was running. The door was open. He moved toward the field, and the craft then swooped down over the field. even lower. It was now about 50 feet overhead. And Barney was there with the binoculars to his eyes, standing at the edge of the road, looking up, and he saw what he described in the first report written to NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, on September 26, 1961, only a few days later. What he described was figures that were dressed in black shiny uniforms that frightened him terribly. And then the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena investigated, and he told that investigator that they were somehow not human. They frightened him terribly. What happened was little fin-like structures started to slide out, and something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. And Barney immediately sensed that they were going to capture him, he said, like a bug in a net. Well, today we know that what comes down is a carrier beam of sorts, and it does take people. So Barney was having the correct feeling that he was going to be captured. So he pulled the binoculars away from his eyes and went screaming back to the car to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. They were only a short distance down the road when they heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car in the same location where they found the shiny spots. And the impact that it had on them was that they had a tingling sensation in their bodies, an electrical tingling sensation. And anyone who's an experiencer knows what that means. That's what we feel when this occurs. And aside from that, their car started to vibrate. And the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with vague memories of what had occurred in the interim. They remembered a roadblock. They remembered finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. And they remembered a fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground. And they tried to rationalize all of this and say, oh, it must have been the moon setting. That must have been what we saw. Oh, there must have been an accident. We just don't remember it, that sort of thing. But they went back time and time again to try to find that dirt road where they encountered that roadblock and that fiery orb. It wasn't until after they had hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon that started in 1964 and ran for 6 months. He took Betty and Barney separately. He reinstated amnesia at the end of their session so they couldn't share information. And then at the end of these sessions, he did therapy with them. So during the 6 months that they were there, they had 10 separate hypnosis sessions. And then they discussed it. Dr. Simon was looking for some kind of rational explanation for what had occurred. And he was thinking of the idea, well, maybe this was transferred from Betty's dreams to Barney's mind through psychic awareness, or maybe Barney overheard Betty telling these dreams that she had, and he developed his own story as the result. So this was really important and interesting to me as having my social science background and psychiatric social work background. So what I did is I transcribed all 10 hours of those tapes and compared them sentence by sentence from the time they left on that trip until after they arrived home and their reactions. And what I discovered is that Dr. Simon's hypothesis was wrong, because Betty and Barney when they were separate, recalled having the same experiences in detail, but it was not in Betty's dreams. So
And
that told me as an investigator, that was a real experience. Go ahead.
yeah, sorry about that, Kathleen.
No
And
problem.
I also noted that while they're different, you know, they share the same similarities with a modern case, but
Mhm.
they're different to a certain, well, they're the same to a certain perspective. And then once they separate, it's two different stories. She had no clue what was going on to Barney Hill. So she couldn't have actually led the, what is the term I'm thinking here? Sorry. She couldn't have led him in any direction because
Right.
her dreams had nothing to do with that. I even remember hearing during the regression sessions, he was asking, where's Betty Hill at this point, or where's Barney? And they had no clue. They didn't
That's right.
confabulate anything. So I found that very interesting as well. And I have her book, A Common Sense Approach to UFOs.
Oh, yes. That's out
oh,
of print now. So that's valuable.
and it's signed. So I was
Oh,
glad to get a
wow.
hold of
That's
it.
even better.
In there, she talks about how Dr. Benjamin Simon actually tried to influence Barney Hill to see if that would work.
Yes.
And it was found that he could tell the difference right away.
Yes. Yeah. He attempted to convince both Betty and Barney that it was a shared dream. And Betty and Barney tried to accept it, but then as they actually thought about it and discussed it, they said, it can't be a shared dream. The dreams were different. Betty had written all of her dreams down. So I was able to compare Betty's and Barney's statements to her dreams as well. Now, in Betty's dreams, the ETs were looked a lot like Jimmy Durante. They had large noses, but they looked Southern European. They had black hair, thick eyebrows, all human features. Their lips were a little bluish. The skin was a little bluish, but aside from that, in her dreams, they were dressed in cadets uniforms, a hat, light blue kind of outfit like a cadet, not in the black shiny uniforms that they were dressed in, which was more like a bodysuit, black shiny bodysuit that they were dressed in. Barney mentioned that from immediately that he had seen that was in his conscious mind, but it had no comparison to Betty's dreams. And under hypnosis, Betty and Barney remembered what they really looked like.
Yeah, and essentially it was the same thing. And
yes,
he notes the Nazi and the Irishman, as he called them. Now, I had a theory about that. Now, I don't know whether that would be kind of a screen memory upon recalling that during regression, or if that might be more of an altered perception kind of thing during the event. So I don't know if maybe that was a way to say, I don't know, like demonstrate an authority figure with the Nazi, for instance, and then the Irishman, you could tell it was playing on his emotions to the point of almost being friendly and trying to be nice. That's what I gathered from that.
Yeah. What I can tell you is that Dr. Simon asked Barney to tell him everything in his history that reminded him of the emotions he was experiencing in that time frame. Now, Barney was in World War II. He was in the Army. He was a sharpshooter and a truck driver. I could never tell if he was actually overseas, but I know he was injured. He had scars on his chest from the explosion that happened. But as with most Black men, or many Black men after World War II, the government was prejudiced, and they denied a lot of those soldiers their rights as veterans of foreign wars. But I have letters that Barney wrote to the veterans of foreign wars. So it leads me to believe, even though I wrote in the book initially that I had did not believe he was that he went overseas. I'm beginning to think he actually did, but I didn't know the history of discrimination by the government at that point. So to get back, I guess, to what you said, Barney, I think when he said he looks like a Nazi, he is a Nazi. That was just Barney's mind going back to Nazi Germany and the fear, the level of fear that those soldiers felt in combat. And then the Irish, most Irish in South Boston, where Barney was working, he was at the South Boston Postal Annex. Those Irish were really prejudiced. They were terrible to the Black people. I guess initially they were vying for the same jobs. It was like, no Irish or dogs need apply, something like that, and because I'm Irish, and my Aunt Betty was Irish. My grandfather's family, my maternal grandfather's family, came over from Ireland during the potato famine. So it was funny for Barney to say the Irish. Well, he has good memories of some Irish from the family, but also of terrible prejudice expressed against him and the Black co-workers that he worked with. And when they ate in a lunchroom together, I was told one story by the son of one of the postal employees who were there. And what happened was the white guys had a bag of what they said was chicken wings. And they said, here, would you guys like to have some of these? We have some left. And they handed them to them. They opened the bag up and it was just bones. It was cruel.
Yeah,
but that's just an example of the kind of cruelty he faced by the Irish at work.
See, and that's kind of where I was thinking when it comes to that and him seeing those two things, maybe it was kind of like a reflection almost.
Yeah.
He wanted to be perceived as friendly. I believe he used that term. So he wasn't trying. I don't really know where I'm getting with this.
Yeah, I remember him saying he seems friendly.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt like they appeared that way. I don't know whether that was on purpose or, like I said, a cover memory, but rather the one appeared as an authority figure in the sense of comply. And the other one appeared as an Irishman. In other words, hey, let's make this go well. Be nice, and I'll be nice to you, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I know I'm saying that a little confused.
And it could have been a screen memory too. I mean, that was my psychological interpretation.
Because
knowing Barney's history, but it could have just been a screen memory.
Well, see, I've looked into the work of Dr. Carla Turner, and she does talk about, in some cases, there's this altered perception, which seems to relate around the abductee.
Yes.
One story, for instance, is that of Pat in her book, Taken. She was a very religious young woman, and when she was abducted with her family, there was a lot of religious overtones to it. There was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that pointed to the gray aliens and said, "These are mine. It's okay to come with us." There was, I believe, kind of like, oh man, the terminology is messing me up here. There was a wall of fire that she had to pass through, and a lot of religious overtones to it. And I kind of seen parallels with that to a degree with this case as well, because while they may not have been religious, they still involved like a Nazi and an Irishman, and they weren't aggressive or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, they were not aggressive. They, in fact, when they opened the car doors and took Betty and Barney out and took them to craft. Along the way, they were saying, we're not going to harm you. We have only a few simple tests that we want to do, and then you'll be on your way. In fact, Dr. Simon asked Barney if he thought he had been kidnapped. And Barney said, well, when I think of kidnapping, I think of someone being harmed, and I wasn't harmed. So we know he wasn't physically harmed. Emotionally, because of, I think, his background growing up in a segregated cell, and also his war experiences. I think that those things had an impact on him. Also, that he had the conscious recall of observing these entities and thought that they were going to capture him. So there was much more emotionality in Barney at that point than in Betty, even though when she saw what they looked like as they were coming toward the car, she really freaked out. She told Dr. Simon she had never been so frightened in her entire life, and she was crying at that point, terrified.
Yeah, I believe that she was fairly irritated with them too, if I recall. She didn't want to be very nice at first, which is understandable.
There was one that really bothered her. There were two sizes of grays on the craft. There were the taller ones who were the physician, and the one she called the leader that we know today as the escort. He sees the human every time they are taken to craft. And so Betty was irritated with them because they took her, and two, with a little one who was standing in the hallway looking in. We know today that those little ones are the police officers, you might say, the guards. They won't let you get off the craft with anything that belongs to them. And Betty tried to get off the craft with a tablet of sorts that had symbols on it. And he saw that she had it, he took it from her, and she was absolutely furious. She was so angry. And she stayed behind when Barney was taken back to the car, arguing, you said I could have this. I want this as my proof. and then the leader, the escort, said to her, well, the decision has been made, not by me, but by others, that you cannot take that. And then he said, I'm sorry, we frightened you. And Betty turned around and said, do you think you can come back? She said, I know people who know far more than I do about all of this. And if you could come back, I could try to arrange for you to meet with them. And so he said, well, I don't know if we can come back. It's not my decision to make. And Betty said, how would you find me? Out of all the people on this planet, how would you find me? And he said, we can always find those we want to find. This was all telepathic, by the way. So yeah, they knew her signature. I doubt that was the first time that she was taken. It might have been Barney's first time, but I don't think it was hers.
No, I don't think it was either. The way she reacted, it doesn't seem too indicative of that. Now, I did have another question. Now, this was never a good argument, in my opinion, but I want to see what you think about this. So
Okay.
I've heard the argument that Hocus Pocus and Frisbee from the Twilight Zone and some Outer Limits episode may have brought that on with them. Now, I found that really weak.
Very, very weak. In fact, I had written a paper about that. I don't think it's on my website any longer, but on that Outer Limits show, it was about the Bifrost Man. And actually the disinformants have had a modern mask created to look a lot more like what Betty and Barney described. But if you go back to the original show with the paper mache masks as it really was done in that time frame, you can see that it's very different. There's a human voice that comes out. There are human features. There is, I'm trying to think, there's something in here. It's very different. I can tell you that when I lecture on it, I show what Betty described as opposed to her dream material and as opposed to what the Bifrost man looked like. No comparison.
Yeah, and it was the same with Hocus Pocus and Frisbee as well.
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, that one was an episode of The Twilight Zone. It essentially is the boy who cried wolf kind of story, right? And this guy is a liar and he gets abducted by aliens, so nobody's going to believe him. And he's trying to get off of there, and he plays the harmonica, which kills the alien. And the alien is like a 6 foot tall black man with what seems to be dark eyes, no mouth kind of thing. It's reminiscent, but not reminiscent enough. And the tale on there doesn't even correlate whatsoever. It's more or less like he's trying to take them to another planet kind of thing.
You have two things going on. You have professional disinformants. They were prevalent for a very long time. Back in January of 1953, the CIA funded Robertson panel met and had to make a decision about how they were going to handle all of this, because by that time, our military had determined that these were extraterrestrial in contact. They were not from our planet. They'd been studying them for several years at that time. They'd done major studies. And so they wanted to dissuade the public from having an interest in UFOs. And what they decided to do was they were going to ask scientists to use logical deduction to explain these events away and to poke fun or embarrass the individuals who reported them. And that went on for many, many years. I mean, even back until in 2013, I believe it was, they were still hauling out what Stan Friedman used to call debunkers, but they're just plain disinformants onto television shows. So you would have the researcher, the UFO researcher, telling the truth about what occurred. And then you would have the disinformant who would come out with false information to line up with the truth. And so you had to choose, and by the way, the UFO investigator or researcher wasn't identified, such as Stanton Friedman, as nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman. It would have been UFO enthusiast Stanton Friedman versus so-and-so who was a psychologist or a college professor or something like that.
Bill Nye the Science Guy, Philip J.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really sad that stigma has always been there, such as, the term little green man, tinfoil hat. I mean, that stuff, it drives me nuts.
Yes.
And as you know, I've been talking to a lot of experiencers and abductees, and a lot of them still can't even come out and talk to family, coworkers, friends, anybody. They feel embarrassed about it, and I find that really sad.
Yeah, it is sad because you have to hold it inside. And that's why support groups are just so important. I was the Mutual UFO Network's director of experiencer research for 10 years. And I set up a program where people could go and speak confidentially to a person who would listen and not make fun. It would be just without passing judgment, non-judgmental listening and just a little support. And people could get a referral to a support group if they wanted. MUFON is changing that now. So you cannot do it confidentially anymore, but you can have anonymity. And there will be a report written, but it will be in a section of the case management system where only 2 people, I believe it is, will ever be able to access it. So it's still pretty safe, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And more and more people are coming forward with their stories, and there are more and more peer facilitated support groups. I run one myself, but it's for people who have been able to come to terms with their experience and are wanting to reach out to assist others. If anyone's interested, you go to the-awakening-souls.com, and there's an application, but read what we have to say. There are 4 of us who started this group. There's no charge for it. We pay for everything.
I'm very glad to hear that you did that, because, I had just recently started actually talking to experiencers and abductees. I've always done the research since about 2008 or 2010. I started listening from regression tapes. I think I even started with Betty and Barney Hill. But actually being able to talk to these guys, man, even just some UFO witnesses, I see how much it bothers them that they can't get it off their chest. So I am very glad to hear that.
Yeah, and it does make such a huge difference just to be able to tell somebody who's not going to laugh at you and not going to ask what you were smoking or what you were drinking or anything like that, or tell you to go see a psychiatrist. That it's terrible that people would treat other people in that manner. And if people are not ready for the awakening souls, I have a whole list of support groups where I can make referrals. And they don't cost anything, but everyone should have the opportunity just to get it off their chest, to talk to somebody about it.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I've had phone calls that, none of them are going in the book, just me and that person talking. None of it went on the podcast, just back and forth, just hearing them out and understanding that they actually went through something.
Yes.
That brought a whole new thing to them. It made me really sympathetic. And until I actually had done that myself, I suppose I didn't really understand that aspect. I'd heard it before, but actually witnessing it was a lot different.
Yes.
And it kind of awakened me to that too, where I was like, well, I don't, because I don't know of a whole lot of support groups where I can send people either. The only thing I can really think would be MUFON. Now that you've said that, I'm glad to hear that, because I will definitely send people that way.
Yeah. Can I send people to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that's great, because people, I just get deluged with email messages, and I cannot speak to everyone, or I wouldn't even, I've worked more than full time, and to fit all of that into, I ended up having to charge. It's not a lot of money. It's only $30, but it reduces the number of people who come to me wanting to speak with me. And so it would be great if I could refer these people who don't want to pay or can't pay to other people.
Yeah, feel free to send me as many as you'd like. I just, I tried, you're one of my inspirations, Bud Hopkins, and obviously John Mack. Dr. Carla Turner I'll throw in there as well. It's just the fact that being able to help these people, it means a lot to me. It's kind of like when me and you spoke before about the Intruders Foundation. I hadn't known that it had closed. I got on there and I found a blog, but that was about it. And I think getting these people some help in the sense of somebody to actually listen to them and take them as credible and just let them talk about the experiences and let them know they're not alone is extremely important.
Absolutely. I started out probably like you, but only it was 32 years ago. And of course, I knew about my aunt and uncle, and I am an experiencer, and for many, many years was just traumatized, walked with trepidation in the darkness at night, couldn't sleep, had all of the problems that other experiencers have in general. And I could never find anyone who did the kind of thing, that non-judgmental listening, the acceptance of the story. Now, they weren't around except for maybe Bud Hopkins, but then I would have to go from New Hampshire all the way to New York City and pay for all of that, and back in the beginning, as it is now, I've stayed at Bud Hopkins' house when he was alive, and he's even hypnotized me. But it was different back 32 years ago when I started. And, I had my first experience, as far as I know, when I was 17, maybe before that. So that was even further back. But, there was just no one. There were no support groups. There was no one to talk to. And it was really difficult in those days.
Yeah. And like I said, I really want to help with that. So yeah, feel free to send me anybody you'd like. I don't have a very big podcast, or my YouTube channel is pretty much non-existent. I'll upload this on there, but I'm not very well known right now.
We all start out that way.
Well, I think I'm building a very good rapport because, I'm polite and I listen to everybody's, what they have to say, and I try to be sympathetic. I don't think anybody's crazy. Okay. And I know the abduction phenomena can get really weird. So I like to hear people out, and you can usually tell just from the emotion on some of these people that they had an experience.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. You're also going to find people who have a major mental illness. And those people are the neediest, because there's always something happening and they need to tell 30 people, not just one. And they have the experiences they report are just far more terrifying and frantic than others. You're also going to find eventually people who have had experiences with interdimensional draconian reptilians. You have to protect yourself around those. I tried to help a man who was having hard experiences, just awful. I knew that it was not a psychological case. He was a high functioning, well-educated man, but he had become extraordinarily ill over the months that we spoke. And then finally, he told me some things that happened that he observed. And it was so horrifying to me that my vibrational frequency, which is generally quite high, dropped. And when it dropped, one of those draconian reptilian interdimensionals attached to me. All the goodness, I could feel all of the goodness flow out of me, and a dark cloud come down over me. And it was very difficult. I tried to get rid of it. I used all of the religious things, the holy water, having my house cleansed. I'm Catholic, so I had crucifixes. I had everything. I used prayer. It didn't go away, and I started to become sick. And I couldn't sleep. My body was hurting. I was having difficulty that I didn't normally have. And then it started talking to me and telling me to kill myself. And that is when I said, I absolutely have to do something today. Now, I have a friend who is a psychotherapist, but she's also a minister. And she lives 3 hours away from me. And so I called her. She tried to remove it. She couldn't. She was going to come down in a couple of weeks to remove it. But when it told me I needed to kill myself, I called Kevin Briggs immediately. And in my new book, Forbidden Knowledge, you'll read about Kevin Briggs and the Council of Eight. This was a study that I and other researchers did secretly over a period of several years. And with the Council of Eight to determine who they were and if they were real. And this was one of the tests. Kevin, will you please, this is what's happening to me. Will you please ask the council to help me? They said they'd protect me. It went away right away.
Wow.
He spoke to the 9th dimensional member of the council and it was gone. Yeah,
That's very-
overnight, within hours. Yeah, so that was one way I knew that they were real. I had a lot more evidence. And in the book, Forbidden Knowledge, the second half of that book is about communication with non-humans and what they have to say. And all of the questions, 120 questions that we asked. And there's very specific answers.
That's very interesting.
Yes, yeah. So it gives a lot of information about why they're here, how long they've been here, what their concerns about humans are, and more and more. I mean, 120 questions. It's a lot of information.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can't wait to pick it up. And I hope my listeners will pick it up as well, because, you know, you're very prolific. You know, like I said, you're well known for your abduction research, and I consider you one of the experts. That's why I felt it was important to have you on. Now, as far as, because I want to get this out to some of my listeners as well, as far as abductions being aggressive, now, what do you make of that?
It depends upon the type of entity that's abducting you. I've worked on 3 major studies on experiencers, 2 with PhD academics, and on about 5,000 experiencers now to this date. And the reptilians tend to be aggressive. And sometimes grays, because there are some grays who work with the reptilians. I've been told that they're captives of the reptilians. I've also been told that the reptilians created them and they're just biorobotic, and it's made to give the grays a bad reputation. So I don't know what the truth is on that, but the reptilians tend to be aggressive. Although a few people have told me they've been very kind and they've healed them, that sort of thing. In terms of the others, the grays are generally not aggressive toward people, but there are many, many different races of grays too, with different modus operandi. On the Council of Eight that I just spoke of, there were 2 grays, and I have ongoing contact with one of them, who is about 5 feet tall, and he's a scientist from Zeta Reticuli and from that star system. And he's has a good sense of humor. He's given me a lot of information, and I like him. I can't see him when he comes because he's 5th dimensional, but I can feel him because I have a strong tingling sensation in my body. Kind of like this light electrical tingling. So, and there are 2 grays, as I said. One is a tall gray, and they're both very kind. They said on the council members said that the only races of ETs that they've invited as part of this extended federation is the reptilians, and they don't want to be part of it because the Federation and the councils have bylaws that everyone has to go by, rules and regulations. And those entities do not want to comply with the rules and regulations. Those reptilians will take anything they want. They think they own everything. And they say that the reptilians are like this on every planet that they go to, all of the inhabited planets. They go in and they just want to take over and claim ownership.
And what do you make of this insectoid or praying mantis type?
Yeah, well, they're very frightening to look at, but there's one on the council who I like. He seems like kind of a jolly fellow, but still, for people, I mean, it looks like a giant bug. They're humanoid in shape, but their bodies are different from ours. They I believe have an exoskeleton. Their arms and legs are extraordinarily thin. They have arthritic looking joints. So they look almost skeletal. They tend to disguise themselves because they frighten humans. So they'll wear a mask. Sometimes they'll wear a full suit. I have a video that was sent to me for analysis. This was for a television show I was doing. And it was obviously a praying mantis, very, very tall, very thin. It was wearing kind of a hood that reminded me of a welder's hood. There was this cutout section here that you could not see through. And it was wearing a floor-length cape. And when it walked very stiffly, and the cape was stiff. So like the legs would go out and the cape would go out too.
And I've heard that before too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cases like that. That is one thing that always kind of threw me off, is I never understood the cloak thing, right? Because I know a lot of times when people are abducted and specifically see that praying mantis, they notice the cloak.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the little grays are wearing those as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's always something that puzzled me. But now that you kind of put that in perspective that way, I mean, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, they do it so that they won't frighten people. Sometimes they wear a full body suit of kind of a mint green, light green color. But in terms of their temperament, what they do on the craft, they tend to be in charge on the craft that they're on. And they tend to be the examiners. The grays tend to be the escorts and the assistants. The insectoids are intense. Everyone will say they're so intense. Mm-hmm. And especially in that eye-to-eye contact with these big vertical bug eyes. If you see their eyes and you have that eye-to-eye contact, the way they communicate is not really good, because they might make you believe that they're eating you, or they're eating off your face, or they're eating off your arm, but they're just trying to tell you that you are only a shell for your soul, for your consciousness, and that you live in that body, but that body is shed eventually and you go into a new body. So that's what they're trying to say. But they have a very odd way of communicating it. They've scared the pants off some people when they've done that sort of thing. And other people describe them as being nice and kind.
I've heard, I've heard that as well. And there's one other thing I was going to ask you about that. Have you ever heard an abductee referring to these insectoids as mother? I've been catching that one a lot lately. Dr. Carla Turner had an experience when she was a young girl, and she has a very vivid memory, or had one. Mm-hmm. And the praying mantis was saying, "Come with me, I'm your mother." And she was yelling, "No, you're not." Right. There's another lady I was talking to named Linda Smith, who also said that very same thing. I believe her husband had that experience, and then it clicked. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. That, I don't know why they think that they can tell people they're their mother and they are going to remember it, unless I've worked with people who have that kind of relationship with the mantis type beings, where the human was a mantis in a previous relationship. And that mantis might have been the mother. There might have been that loving relationship. And that human, the human that I have worked with in hypnosis, absolutely loved that being. Didn't want to go home, didn't want to go back to the earth. Wanted to stay with her people.
I hear that struggle a lot with people. They either really want to go home or they want to stay. And I think Betty Hill, if I recall, really wanted to stay with them for a little bit. I'm like I said, I've had a long day at work, but
Yeah.
if I recall, she was not opposed to staying with them for a little bit.
No, for a little bit, no. But she did not want to stay with them for any period of time. But I can tell you, 2 weeks before she died, she said, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be on craft with them again. And 2 weeks later, she died.
Wow.
And, so who knows? I have been told by psychics that and mediums that she's on craft back with them. And that, maybe she came from them to begin with. Maybe she was one of the volunteers who came to Earth, one of the early volunteers, and reincarnated into a human body in order to assist in our development.
Well, as far as communication, obviously that's telepathic. What do you make of that? What do you think would be behind that? I always describe it as more of a possible biological neural link, as an example.
Well, that makes sense to me. They say that telepathy is the universal language. Other animals talk using telepathy. We've just lost that ability. They say that we once had that ability, and it would be good if we could develop that again. So they work with us. When we're on craft, we can communicate telepathically. And now those of us who are older, who have known them for many, many years, can have them come into our environment where we don't see them, but we can communicate telepathically.
Yeah, I tried to attribute that more to possibly brainwaves. I could be way off base on that, but that's how I try to make people understand it, I suppose, because we have 5 brainwaves. It could even be maybe there's some 6th brainwave we don't know about that they're able to tap into and communicate that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not all that hard for me to believe. In fact, there's a very good book called Electric Brains where he goes into that. And, it was very fascinating. So that's just what I've always attributed to that. But some people, I think they think it's all woo-woo and hard to understand. And really, it's not. You just got to look at things differently.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I don't know if it's, what the process is. I don't know. All I know is that I've done it and I can do it. And it is a matter of deeply relaxing and not thinking about anything.
Just kind of clearing your mind.
Yes, it's like going into a deep state of meditation when it can occur.
That's very interesting. Wow. Because I myself am not an experiencer. So I try to put myself in that shoe a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the telepathic communications, I've never experienced it. I can definitely believe it. it's just I want to understand a little more, I suppose.
Mhm.
Now,
Yes. Yeah.
as far as understanding abductions, I can understand that they are very different from sleep paralysis, as an example, or just dreams, because I've had UFO dreams, I've had abduction dreams, and I can immediately wake up, and sleep paralysis, and immediately wake up and be able to distinguish the difference. Even a
Mhm.
couple months ago, I had woken up in the middle of the night and I tried to force myself to see an alien in my hallway, and that didn't work. So, when it comes down to that argument against alien abductions, it makes no sense to me at all.
That's true because, well, we in one of our studies, we asked, and this was with 516 experiencers. We asked first, have you woken up paralyzed and only able to move your eyes? Well, 90% of the participants said yes. Then we asked, if have you been wide awake? Have you observed non-humans in your environment? And then have you become paralyzed? 60% of the abductees said yes. So that completely eliminates the hypothesis that it's sleep paralysis
Yeah.
or sleep hallucinations. These people are awake. Sometimes they're not even in their home, they're outside when this happens.
Yeah, Betty and Barney Hill are a good example with that. They were outside when this all occurred, driving
Yes,
home.
absolutely.
See, another argument that I usually use against the sleep paralysis thing is sleep paralysis doesn't last that long. These
Right.
experiences can last over a good amount of time.
Now, the average missing time is 2 hours. It can span to, far less than that or far more than that. Some people, like Travis Walton, were taken for 5 days. I've talked to others who were taken for extended periods of time. And then I've spoken with people who didn't really notice missing time, but had an experience with evidence, or were returned before they were taken. So the timeline is different with these ETs. They don't have linear time the way that we do.
And that would explain how time goes differently in some of these cases, too.
Yes.
So, what would you make of cover memories as an example? So, like people seeing owls and things like that.
Yeah, that is perplexing to me because I'm not sure if these entities are putting these thoughts into the human mind. We know they're quite capable. They know what we're thinking. They know what our next move is going to be. They've shown that with the Navy, and the government has admitted to it.
Mm-hmm.
So they could be manipulating our minds because the fifth and sixth dimensionals from the council said they have their own bodies. They cannot shapeshift. They are in that body all the time, only at a higher frequency. So it makes me believe that it's probably the idea that they are just manipulating our thoughts, and that they're doing this so that we won't be disturbed by their appearance. Again, so they're doing it in kindness, they think. People see deer in the road as they're driving down the road, and then they're taken to craft. Those aren't deer. Under hypnosis, they're grays generally. The children see clowns or firefighters or police officers, things that make them feel safe. Bunny rabbits, huge, like 5 foot tall rabbits. And some adults have seen those too.
Yeah, Preston
outside.
Dennett just did a video about them appearing as teddy bears. Whitley
Oh.
Strieber talked about Mr. Peanut.
Mhm.
I mean, there's Terry Lovelace with Little Gray Monkeys. I mean, it's pretty prominent, and I never knew if it was really the hard part to distinguish whether it was us or them that is doing that. Because I know within psychology, cover memories often happen. So with a traumatic event. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is like they're trying to harm you. It could just be perceived that way, and you're seeing it as a harmful thing.
Yes.
My interpretation of that is, I suppose, yeah, it comes down to that. It's either us or them. It's either our minds perceiving them in a way that's going to make us feel more comfortable, or it's them appearing that way on their part to make us more comfortable. And distinguishing the two is something that was kind of hard for me to get at.
I understand that, and I think that it's a good hypothesis. I think in order to determine this, we have to think about ourselves as humans. We have a limited number of screen memories that we have of these entities. They're deer, rabbits, as I said, on and on, the things that I just mentioned and you just mentioned. If it came from human minds, wouldn't there be more? Wouldn't there be a greater variety?
That's a very good point. Because when I spoke to Preston Dennett, he mentioned that too, because owls are very prominent, as you know.
Yes, absolutely.
So I suppose, okay, that does answer my question. It is very helpful to me, because that is one of those things that's always perplexed me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is perplexing. The behavior of these ETs and the way they can communicate, the way they know our minds is very perplexing, in a sense. Now, when I'm talking to people, when something registers as true, they make me feel through my crown chakra this tingling sensation. Sort of as evidence that, yes, you're right on that one, Kathleen. So I appreciate it. It also happens when I speak with experiencers and they make a statement or ask a question.
Wow.
So it's helpful. It's a little bit of a psychic sense in a way. I haven't always had it. I've only had it since I did this experiment with the Council of Eight. But it's useful and it feels good. I'm glad that I can help people that way.
Yes, I am very appreciative of everything you do, Kathleen. You do a lot of great work out there and help a lot of people.
That's what I try to do. You know, I've always been in a helping profession, first as a social worker and then as a teacher and education services coordinator. And that's where I come from, and from the heart, and that's what I do. I do have to make income because it's my full-time job. I have to say more than full-time. But for years, I didn't accept payment for anything.
And see, that's understandable. And, everybody has to make a living. Like I said,
Yes,
I work full-time job. I just got off of work before I talked to you. I mean, it's just, there's a lot that goes into this too.
yes, there is.
So how can people reach out to you?
You can go to my website at Kathleen with a K -Marden, MARDEN.com. And once you arrive at the website, you will see the books. You can order autographed copies of any of my 6 books. You can read free articles that I've posted. You can contact me for a hypnosis session or for a consultation, a 1-hour consultation, or you can find out where I'm going to be speaking this year.
Well, like I said, I want to thank you again. Are you going to be speaking anytime soon at like a MUFON or anything like that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'll be in Pennsylvania in April. I'll be in McMinnville, Oregon in May, and I think it's May. It might be June. It's all on my website. I will be at the Roswell UFO Festival the 4th of July weekend. Then the following weekend, I'll be speaking at the MUFON Symposium. I'll be speaking in Exeter, New Hampshire, probably over Labor Day weekend. A couple of weeks later, in Michigan at a conference there. So yeah, I'm lining up conferences, live conferences this year, which is really nice to be doing live conferences again.
Say in person kind?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay, good.
In person.
Because I might try to go to one of those. I'd love to meet you in person.
Oh, that would be great. I'd love it. Uh-huh.
Well, Kathleen, I want to thank you again. I want to thank you for all the
My
help
pleasure.
for people as well.
Thank you. I do the best I can.
You do a great job.
And best of luck to you as well. Thank you so much for reaching out to experiencers, because so many people need it and truly appreciate it.
I have gathered that, and that's, well, I guess that's what I'm here for. I
Yes.
enjoy it, and like I said, I get a great deal of satisfaction helping people. So,
Mhm.
but I will let you go, and I hope you have a good night, Kathleen.
Thank you. And you're a special person. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Well, you have a
Good
good
night.
day, Kathleen.
Thank you. You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.